The mnemonic all students take CAT represents when the trig function is positive in the given quadrants. So it is saying not necessarily the trig function, but the actual trig ratio. But we say sine is positive in the second quadrant. We're really talking about the trig ratio. So in the first quadrant here, it is going to be all. And the all represents all the trig functions. So that means that all the trig ratios of the trig functions are actually going to be positive. So if we look here, that means they're going to be positive. And the reason why is because cosine is positive. Um, because of the x-axis, y is positive, and therefore it represents sine on there. So all the trig functions, sine and cosine, are positive. Therefore, the tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent are also positive because they're made up of sine and cosine. So all the trig functions are positive in the first quadrant. In the second quadrant, we have students. And that represents S is for sine, and it's also for the reciprocal, which is cosecant. So the sine and the cosecant are the ones that are going to be positive. So sine is positive, the cosecant is positive, everything else is negative. And then in the third quadrant, we have takes, and that's for T, and that's going to be tangent, and then cotangent because they're the reciprocals. So that means that everything else is going to be negative, tangent is going to be positive, and so therefore so is cotangent. And then in the fourth quadrant, we have CAT, and that is going to be cosine, and therefore it's going to be secant. And because secant and cosine are reciprocals of each other, everything else is going to be negative. The cosine is going to be positive. The tangent is negative. The cosecant's negative, positive, and then negative. And so what it's really talking about again is the trig ratios. So when it says the cosine is negative in the third quadrant, that is true, but it's really talking about the trig ratio. The angle is with direction. So the angle, if it's going counterclockwise, it's going to be positive. If it's going counterclockwise, it's going to be negative. So the angle's direction and sign is if the angle's sign is if it's given the direction, and the trig function and its trig ratio are both the same, saying the sign is positive or the sign is negative. It's talking about the trig ratio. Okay, and that is how we represent all students take CAT.